Welcome to the Ideas Club's podcast. In this episode, we will be discussing the ideas process in creating the Ideas Club journal, and we'll be asking some other intriguing questions to our editor-in-chief, one of our editor-in-chiefs, Lena Marzona. Then, we will interview some of the journalists about their articles for this issue of the Ideas Journal. Lastly, we will have a panel discussion about data from a survey we've conducted about Black and biracial students at JFK. 30 Black and biracial students anonymously took part in this survey, and we will be discussing some of the results.
So the first issue of the Ideas Journal focused on identity and introduced the Ideas Club and the platform that we are trying to create in order to promote conversation regarding diversity, and kind of delved into our identities in our different environments, especially our identities at JFK. Our second journal issue was focused on women's issue. We went to the Women's March and reflected on that, and also just discussed some of the personal plights that we have faced as young women at JFK and what we expect to experience in the future. So the third issue of the journal focuses on race. We were inspired by Black History Month. We held a Black women's panel and a Black and biracial student panel that both inspired us to write and reflect on those panels, and also kind of delve further into the issue of race and our environment at JFK. So Mr. Lazar, Amalia, and I initially brainstormed ideas for articles. We wanted to have some reflections on the panels. We wanted to include some new nuanced topics, and we wrote those up and then had students both sign up for those articles that we brainstormed, and we also let them creatively kind of think of ideas themselves and write about topics regarding race that they were interested in. We also conducted a survey of 30 Black and biracial students at JFK, and we analyzed that data and used it to kind of look at the pros and the cons of race at JFK and the dynamics and differing perspectives that biracial students have at our school. We believe that it's important to discuss race because thinking about race dictates a lot of our attitudes and resulting behaviors. And by creating an open dialogue, we hope to kind of sensitize and empathize and generate self-reflection on how the decisions we make influence our surroundings. And we really cared about hearing from biracial students at JFK and having this survey to kind of represent their experiences and target kids early on. Like racial profiling, discrimination in the workforce and in everyday lives is a huge problem in the world. And by targeting kids early on, we hope to kind of create that mindfulness that will reflect in more positive actions later on. Because a lot of these discriminatory behaviors result from a lack of education and a lack of dialogue regarding race and the experiences that Black people have. The goal of the issue was to, like I previously said, create a dialogue, create a platform where we can listen to the struggles of Black and biracial students, because without listening to the people that have been marginalized and discriminated against, we can't really start discussing something that we've only read about in the newspapers. It's important to hear directly from the source. And I think by writing articles and reflecting on the panels that we had, that we create an environment and that we create topics that, a lot of people relate to differently, and that we discuss those differences and that we listen to those that have been affected and hopefully find a respectful way to sensitize and be honest and open about race at our school. While we were happy that we got to conduct a survey and gather data regarding different experiences of Black and biracial students, and that we reflected on panels and also took a deeper look into different topics that weren't discussed on those platforms, we would have hoped to have more reflections of Black and biracial students and their experiences. We had a lot of white authors of articles, and while their perspective comes from a good place, they obviously can't completely understand the experiences that Black and biracial students have had at JFK. Our purpose was to create discussion, and we hope that we did that with our articles. And we hope that we can kind of hear from Black and biracial students because they've read the articles written by white students at JFK, and that we can kind of engage together and take those two perspectives and discuss them in a peaceful environment.
So I wrote about our school trying to become a Schule ohne Rassismus, which means a school without racism. And so this is an organization that tries to promote diversity in German schools. And this isn't just racial diversity, but also sexual orientation-based discrimination to combat that as well. And so there has been some controversy surrounding our school trying to become a school without racism. And so the way our school can do that to become part of this is to get signatures from 70% of the school body. And this can be teachers and students. And a lot of students have been saying that they don't want to become a school without racism because they think it'll just be some title to declare that the school doesn't have racism. In actuality, it's a pledge to actively combat any racism. And so the controversy lies in people fearing that not enough action will be taken and that the title is just a title. Personally, I think that it is a great step in the right direction to become a Schule ohne Rassismus. And I think that it sends a very negative message if many Berlin schools do have this title and we are one of the ones who don't. That thing that sends more a message that no, we're not willing to show that we don't want to promote racism. And I think it's important to keep in mind that it is not enough just to get this title. It's not enough just to get everybody to sign this petition, because we can have this title and we can be part of this organization, but we have to let people know that this is a pledge and this is a commitment. And I think if we have this title in combination with people actively trying to make a difference, then that could be more effective. I don't think that the purpose of the petition was communicated well, because when I was interviewing people to get quotes for the article, one of my questions was whether or not they knew what they were signing and what it meant to sign the petition. And many of them didn't know that they were actually committing and dedicating themselves to combat racism and discrimination of all kinds. And I think a lot of them thought I know a lot of them thought that they were signing it just so our school could have this title, because all that had been communicated to them was that the school needs 70% of the student body and of the school body to sign it. And so I think if we really want to make this effective, and I think if we want people to actually fulfill their duty that they're committing to, that we need to better communicate what it means to sign it. I don't think the cynicism regarding the petition is entirely unwarranted, because I think, especially with events or endeavors that are about getting a title, that many students think that, well, once this title is achieved, then we won't actually fulfill our duty, and especially when the duty hasn't been communicated to us. So with the students who don't know why they're signing, I think all of these are grounds for pessimism and for cynicism. And I think also our school really hasn't been the best about really trying to actively combat discrimination in the past. So many students are thinking, well, why will this now cause a change? And why will a simple title mean that our students are now dedicated to combating discrimination? But I think that if the message is communicated clearly enough, and that if there are more programs and organizations in place like the Ideas Club and more activities coming out of that to continuously reinforce the goal, then that it can be effective. But I think there are definitely some grounds for cynicism. When I was telling people about the article I was writing and that it was about the controversy surrounding becoming a Schule ohne Rassismus, a lot of people were really surprised because they thought, okay, well, what's wrong with it? They assumed that the only controversy around it, or the only reason people would be disagreeing with it, would be because for some reason they don't want people to promote diversity. Really, it's that they want to be very committed to promoting diversity, and they want to make sure that this isn't a simple title and that people are actually fulfilling their duty. So I think writing this article showed me that people really want to foster a really inclusive environment, especially in JFKS, and I think it reshaped how I saw a lot of the students here. So writing this article really showed me that the students are in fact very committed to promoting a safe and inclusive environment at JFK.
Well, the piece I wrote about the biracial student panel and their experiences at JFK was more or less a positive experience, and I very much enjoyed listening to their individual mindsets and experiences and interactions with the student body and the teachers. And I also found it very interesting that they had a very positive experience at JFK. The students that were elected to speak in this panel on the biracial experience at JFK were more or less high-performance students that have integrated themselves incredibly well into the school's ecosystem, and also community. And they're generally very prominent, positively, parts of the student body, which is why I understand why they're positive. They've put such an emphasis on their positive experiences at JFK. And I think that they were also so hesitant to explain the negative aspects or speak out about the negative experiences at JFK was because they were sitting on stage looking at a Caucasian audience that would pick apart every single one of their answers, every single one of their facial expressions, and every single one of their experiences. The data that came back was more in the direction of what I had expected from the panel, specifically because of America's and Germany's history when it comes to racism and oppression. And that the biracial children at JFKS, the biracial students at JFKS, had such split experiences, half of them not horrible, but bad enough for them to have left an impact, and yet half of them positive enough that they're speaking out in an anonymous survey that it was 100% positive, shows that even though there are positive aspects of the JFKS biracial experience, we do still have to improve. We still do have to help and encourage our biracial students to be able to freely speak out against racial humor that hurts them, and racism that might be rampant amongst the student body or amongst the faculty, and not be afraid of negative repercussions.
Survey of 30 Black and biracial students, asking them various questions about their experiences with race at JFK. We're going to be discussing some of these data points now. So to start off, there's 2 data points regarding students' relations with teachers regarding race at JFK. So 1/3 of students disagree that teachers treat them equally, and 2/3 agree that teachers do a poor job of fostering discussion about race in classrooms. Could you kind of analyze these data points and discuss whether they are surprising or not and how you relate to them?
Well, one thing that does not surprise me at all is that 2/3 agree that the teachers do a poor job at discussing race in the classroom. We have not discussed the issue of racism until ninth grade, really in depth. In English, we read literature that talked about racism or was in the time of extreme racism in the United States, and in history, it took till 10th or 11th grade that we actually talked about the issue of race in the United States. I mean, it's all around the world, but especially in the United States. We never talked about apartheid, for example. So I totally agree that teachers did a very poor job in ever discussing the issue of race. And I think that could be partly because of their discomfort to talk about it, or it also could be that they feel that they're not the right people to tell the students about it.
Also, like, in regards to them feeling, the teachers not feeling like they're the right people to be talking about race in a classroom setting, the school should make a bigger effort into actually hiring teachers of color so that we're able to have role models for our Black and biracial students, to be able to have people in the school setting that they're comfortable approaching in case there are situations that involve students expressing racism towards their Black or biracial counterparts. But I also think it's important that we as a community at our school focus on a more in-depth discussion of Black history, particularly in America, and the after effects of the American racism on the rest of the world, because we are an American school, and that is our responsibility.
Almost half of the people surveyed believe that race jokes are insensitive, race jokes that are made by fellow students. This was, however, not reflected in the panel discussion. Could you maybe discuss the dissonance and also kind of go into where we can draw the line with jokes about race?
I think one has to keep in mind that these responses to the survey were anonymous. We don't know who submitted these. We only know that there are 30 biracial kids at JFK. The panel was 5 biracial students sitting on a stage, being presented in front of a wildly Caucasian student body. And of course they didn't want to point out or open up the floor for debate on these issues. And I also think that it is always different being faced with people who you consider your friends and make jokes like these, and then you having to stand up and confront them about it, rather than if it's a survey where you can answer in a way that won't have any repercussions on your academic journey.
I mean, I was part of the panel and I also took the survey, if I may say that. I believe that there is a line. The line, it is a very, very risky topic to talk about. I think these jokes shouldn't be made in the first place, but you can't censor people because freedom of speech. But there is a line that you can draw, if you understand what I mean. So it's kind of a conundrum. You're always going back around, is this okay? We shouldn't have these jokes. But then again, we have jokes about other things that are insensitive. Yeah, I understand what the people who said that these jokes are insensitive are talking about. I totally agree with them. But the thing is, it would be hypocritical of me to say that these jokes are bad because I've made insensitive jokes too, that I've made them with my friends, they accepted them, but I noticed myself, this is not really the right thing to do, but in that moment it was funny. Same thing with race jokes. They can be funny in the moment if they are brought across the right way, but still in another moment they could be totally terrible and hurting for people. So that's a very hard topic, and
I agree with Josh on that that people will continuously bring up the argument of freedom of speech. And yet, I think there is a clear line. And I think if you need to reach back on jokes that oppress a group of people or are filled with malicious content to a group of people, that the core of your humor isn't humor, it is reaching back and making fun of this history of oppression that these people and their ancestors have experienced. And I don't think that's okay.
well, if you say it like that, I totally agree with you. No, no, yeah, I totally agree with that. That is true. I mean, as I said, the whole freedom of speech thing is true too. But if you think about it like that, that people to be funny have to go back, have to take things that oppress another group of people, not only black people. It can be Indian people. It can be Jewish people. Any group that is a minority in a specific country. It's very sad.
Okay, so 76% of survey participants agree that people don't understand what it is like to be black and biracial. How do you interpret this? Why do you think this is? Could you discuss that?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I strongly agree with that because, surprise, I am biracial, and I totally agree that people of white Caucasian people do not understand the, I don't want to say struggle, but the different experience that black people and biracial people have at the school as well as in the world, because you're not seen in a country that's predominantly white. You're not seen as the same person. You might be white and Polish or white and Italian, but you're still white, and you still look indifferent to the rest of the population. And being black, you always stick out, no matter what. You always stick out, except if you're in a place where there are a lot of black people, of course. But in a place like this, especially at our school, where there is a fraction of black students among the student body, you always stick out. And people sometimes do treat one differently if one is not white. This can be good, bad, but it's different. And that's why white people do not understand how it is to be different.
70% of survey participants agree that JFK fosters equal success for them. Could you talk about that? Do you agree with that statement, or do you not agree?
I do agree, because despite the 73% fostering that they have different, that they are seen, that the biracial experience is different, that can have something to do with success, but at JFK, I don't think it has anything to do with that, because the teachers see the students, or most of the teachers see the students as indifferent, right? I mean, that's what I believe. Eliza, do you have any experiences yourself from friends?
I mean, I think I should just say this for people who are listening who don't know me. I am not biracial. I am a Caucasian woman. I happen to be Jewish, but that is the only thing that would somehow cause any oppressive or negative actions towards me. I have heard stories of biracial students in particular being singled out or called out, or having jokes made against them that even I, as a white person, found offensive. Maybe that's because I am just more receptive to this type of stuff, or I'm more aware or more willing to engage against that type of stuff, but with specific teachers, I can clearly see that it would be uncomfortable as a biracial student to sit in their class and listen to them teach or talk.
Yeah.
Or make comments.
It's true. That is it's a fraction of the faculty, but that fraction is enough to create a difference. But most of this teachers, I think, see the students as indifferent.
So lastly, we asked how many Black and biracial students have felt threatened in Berlin as a result of being Black or biracial, and this was a pretty split response, 50-50. So 50% said that they had, and 50% said that they hadn't. Could you talk about your own experience and your own perceptions of how people are threatened and treated in Berlin based off of their race?
Well, oftentimes I spend a lot of my time at Kurfürstenstraße, like around Friedrichshain and Kreuzberg and Neukölln and Moabit, kind of where all those different parts of Berlin meet. And the Black population is a lot higher there than, for instance, where I live, which is around Kudam. I definitely am aware that there's more police cars patrolling those areas. More people kind of standing in clusters in the shadows, having heated discussions. More people, not just Black people, but also white people on the street trying to sell themselves or drugs. People being afraid to walk through the dark alone, clutching their bags. And I think that comes with social media kind of portraying this image of the aggressive Black man and Black women, and the fear that comes along with this aggression and this unknown entity that has only in recent years come to Berlin and Germany in new waves. And I do think there is an animosity amongst the white population of Berlin and Germany against the other. And I don't think that's 100% only against Black people, but it's also against refugees, against Eastern Asian people in general. But I think it's easiest to see when it affects Black people, because Asians, specifically Eastern Asians, are seen as highly intelligent, very forward in technology. And refugees are seen as these poor souls that that white savior complex comes to light and comes to mind again. But the Black population is kind of left behind in all of that, and there's no, in the white population, positive aspects associated to them.
I believe that there is, that being Black, I myself am biracial, for me, there is some threats, not as much in Berlin, more in Germany, sadly the eastern part of Germany, or sometimes the southern part of Germany, not as much there because through U.S. involvement in the past, they have gotten used to seeing people of color and people of the other, as Elisa said, seeing that there. And in Eastern Germany and even Eastern Berlin, you get looks. It's just obvious. You get looks, and they're not always threatening, but they can be sometimes. And it truly sometimes scares me how backward the world is and how backward we are going. Like, racism was over after the Civil Rights Act was passed and apartheid ended. No, it was not over, and it's still there, and it's sadly getting stronger again. And it does not surprise me at all that 50% have voted for it and 50% voted against it. Now, going back to the survey, because I mean, it's literally 50% live in Zehlendorf and the other 50% live in at Kurfürstenstraße, right? So in Zehlendorf, you have a bulk of old white people that feel threatened by black people, where they then kind of threaten the black people. And in the city, there are a lot of black people that just live freely. And I totally understand that data. It's sad, but the one positive thing about it is that if you can speak the language, and all of the black and biracial kids that I know here speak the language, the German language, you have a plus, and that plus gets you far in this country. And I'm happy to be able to be black and be German, so I can speak the language, but I'm also singled out. But with those two combined, it can help me a lot in life.
Could both of you give us a concluding sentence on your reflection of the data, just to kind of round this off?
I think while the panel discussion of biracial students and their experiences at JFK was a step forward into the right direction, I find that the spotlight that was then blasted onto these individuals prohibited them from giving their true opinions and their true experiences. And I think that the survey also highlights this, which is why from the get-go we should have done the panel discussion and the survey parallel.
While the data is quite confusing because it conflicts with a lot of things that were said in the student panel, I see where the people are coming from, and I myself agree to these conflicting data points.
So, in conclusion, the data points are conflicting with personal experience that we heard on the panel, and those conflicting ideas remain crucial in understanding race and talking about race at our school. And the symbolism of this, unanswered question, we hope carries out into your thoughts and discussions at home with your friends and with your family when you're discussing race and the complexity of it.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. This is our final episode of the podcast for this school year, 2018-2019. We will be back next year with some interesting new topics and hopefully some new voices and some new insight into the world and the topics that we discuss. Hope you enjoyed this episode and got some valuable information out of it. See you next school year, and don't forget to read the journal. Yeah, see you soon.